Namaste, hello, and welcome back to Vision Economics Academy. I am Sir Shivankar, and today we are continuing with chapter number 7 Aggregate Demand and Related Concepts. Today we are covering aggregate supply as we had already finished up with aggregate demand and the schedule diagram of it and some points about it. So today we will be covering aggregate supply. Now what aggregate supply is, before we go into that, I would just like to request you all to please like, subscribe and share the channel so that I get motivated and encouraged to, make more such videos. Without further ado, let's start. Aggregate supply. What aggregate supply is? Aggregate supply is the money value of all final goods and services that all the producers are willing to supply in an economy. Willing to supply. That means it's also ex ante. That is planned. Okay. So aggregate supply is the money value of all the final goods and services that the suppliers are willing to supply at a given period of time. Now, aggregate supply is also known as national income. Now, why is this so? Let's find out. In physical terms, aggregate supply is the total output of goods and services in an economy. Total output matlab the total production of goods and services in an economy, right? Now, the output or the production has values, right? So the value of total output is distributed back to the factor inputs, right? Further factor services. So in order to produce, there was land, labor, capital, organization all involved. So further factor services, the value of total output is distributed in the form of rent, wages, profit and interest. So sum total, the sum total of all these factor incomes give us the national income through domestic and national level, of course, right? So the the factor payment that the factors of production receives, these are the incomes. So if we add all those incomes and the domestic and the national income, it will give us the national income. So that's why aggregate supply is also known as national income. Now, what are the components of aggregate supply of national income? So aggregate demand in the previous section was C plus I, that is consumption plus investment. However, aggregate supply is consumption plus savings, because income is either consumed and those which are not consumed is saved, right? With this, income is either consumed or saved. That's why AS or aggregate supply is C plus S. Okay, all right. Now let us understand aggregate supply diagrammatically. Before going into the diagram, let us make the same schedule 0, 100, 200. This is income, which is 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and consumption even at zero level of income is still there, so it is 40, right? And then we are adding 80 each. Now the savings, as we know, y equals to c plus s. So if the c comes this side, it will be y minus c equals to s. So saving is y minus c. Minus 40, minus 20, 0, 20, 40, 60 and 80. Now aggregate supply is just the addition of C and S. So plus and minus 40, 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 and 600. Okay. Now, y-axis represents consumption and savings, whereas the x-axis represents the income. All right, this is the origin. Now, let me get the scale. The aggregate supply would be the 45-degree line. Okay. All right. Now, this is the aggregate supply, or C plus S. Now, why is this a 45-degree line dividing the axis into two equal halves? This is because it is just a reference line. Reference line stating that if all of the income was consumed, what would be the consumption? It would be 45-degree. Okay, so it is just a reference line which shows what people actually consume, what consumption would be rather if they had spent entirety of their income on consumption. So this is the 45-degree line which shows that, right? So it divides each of these axes into equal halves. At every point of aggregate supply curve, consumption is equals to income. Okay, all right. Now, to move further, we will understand what is consumption function. Consumption function is the functional relationship between consumption and national income. So consumption is dependent on income. So consumption is a function of income, right? So let us draw the aggregate supply curve first. Okay, so this 45-degree line, exactly it is not 45-degree, but okay. Aggregate supply, it starts from the origin itself. Then this part is consumption. This is income. Right? Now, in the above diagram, when we did this aggregate supply, we said that it's a reference showing that if entirety of the income is consumed, right? But in reality, is entire of the income consumed? No, it isn't. Some are saved also. So the, you know, the gap between the consumption curve and a aggregate supply curve is actually the savings. Now, in reality, as I said, in reality, all the income is not consumed, right? So some are saved also. So when we draw the consumption curve with along with the saving, then there is a gap between 45-degree line and consumption line, which I will show you. So as we know, the consumption line curve does not start from the origin, but little above the origin. So this is consumption curve. Okay. Now, let us give this OC. Okay. See, that is the autonomous consumption, right? So even at zero level of income, there is still some consumption, right? That's autonomous consumption. Now, until the point where your consumption curve is above the income curve, though that part is Dissavings. And once the break-even point reaches at point E, where consumption is equals to income, yes, after that your income curve becomes greater than the consumption curve, then we have savings. Yes, all right. Now, some of the important points to note here is that starting point of consumption curve is not at the origin, it starts at OC. because of autonomous consumption. Consumption is still there even at zero level of income, right? Now the slope of consumption curve, if you see, it is positively sloping, right? So it is positively sloping because as income increases, consumption also increases. So there's a positive relation. Now, when, as I've already said, when your income is less than consumption, the blue line is the consumption, black line is the income. When income is less than the consumption, there is Dissavings, right? And when your income is greater than consumption, there is savings, right? That we have to know. And at break-even point, consumption is equals to income. All right. So those are some of the points we have to remember. This E is the break-even point where consumption is equals to income, and how there is this savings and savings, what actually the consumption curve is, we have all done. All right, so in the next class we'll continue with this chapter. As I've already told right at the starting of the chapter that I've divided this chapter into many parts to make it easier for us to understand. So till then, please stay safe, study well, and this is Sir Shivankar signing off. Thank you.